Over the last, I don't know, 4 or 5 months, I've been going through a bit of a John Wyndham phase. I've been rereading some that I've read many times over the years and then reading some for the first time. I have a pretty long relationship with John Wyndham. The Day of the Triffids particularly, but also the Chrysalids were some of the first science fiction books that I ever read back in the early 80s. So I have a bit of a soft spot for him. And John Wyndham had really two phases of his career. He wrote quite a bit between the wars, and that was quite different in character to his later work. His pre-war work was mostly for the US market. It was somewhat pulpy and written under various pen names, combinations of his middle names. And in this video, we're going to focus on the second, better known phase of his work. And we're going to focus just on the novels, and only those novels that were published while he was alive. There were a couple that were published posthumously after his death by his estate, one of which was abandoned by Wyndham partway through writing it. And I haven't read those and I'm not going to consider them here. So we're going to look at 7 novels in total, and I'm going to rank them as we go. So starting at the bottom of the pile, we've got The Outward Urge, which probably has the best cover. I think I really like this cover. And I've got several of these Peter Lord editions in the Penguin science fiction. I'm missing a couple, as you'll see, though I've got a different edition of those two when we get to them. And the Outward Urge actually is quite different in character, I would say, to the other 6 novels in this post-war period. It's a fix-up for a start, so it's based on some short stories, and it features the Troon family, various generations of, and really covers man's quest for space, the outward urge of the title. And at least at the beginning, it brings quite a quaint vision of Britain in space, one that never really happened. There's space stations and rockets, and it's all very Dan there. As I say, it's quite different in character to the other post-war novels. It's more conventional hard science fiction, if I can put it that way. Maybe a little bit more similar in character to his pre-war novels, actually. The Outward Urge covers a couple of 100 years worth of future history, in which after a devastating nuclear war wipes out the northern hemisphere, Brazil becomes a world power and declares that space is their province. The Troon family, having conveniently moved to Brazil, later plays a part in space becoming independent. So The Outward Urge, it was enjoyable enough, but it was fairly workaday in comparison to some of the other books that we're going to look at. The next is The Kraken Wakes, and this is an alien invasion. And actually there are 2 or 3 different alien invasion tales to come in the next 4 or 5 books. In The Kraken Wakes, there's a husband and wife team. They're both journalists for the English Broadcast Corporation, which doesn't exist. It's a facsimile for the BBC, I guess. And they are a vehicle for telling the story. They have an inside track in government, so they get some of the inside details of what's going on. It's quite a different take on an alien invasion. We never actually see the aliens for a start. Witnesses see fireballs in the sky, and those hit the ocean, aiming for the deepest parts of the ocean too. As I said, the aliens remain unseen throughout the book. The most obvious manifestation of it initially is attacks on shipping, which impacts the economy globally. The next time we see a manifestation of the aliens are in the form of some kind of like sea creature / sea tank, which make kind of coastal incursions and cause havoc whilst they do. And it takes humans a little while to respond and react to these little beach invasions, but they're easily tackled. They're not particularly well protected, and your typical grenade launcher can finish them off. So those are effectively countered, and we reach a sort of what seems to be a comfortable stalemate. But then Wyndham flips the script, and it becomes a post-apocalyptic tale after the aliens of the peace cause the ice caps to melt and flood the world. And this is the part of the book that I really, really enjoyed. I found that the observer role of the journalist was a little bit detached, although they do get involved from time to time, but I'd have preferred more like a first-person narrative view, I think. And like I said, I enjoyed the last third of the book, which was a proper end-of-the-world tale, and I do like an end-of-the-world tale. The next is Chucky, which is a first contact tale of sorts, or is it? We've got a young boy, Matthew, who's 10 or 11 years old at the beginning of the book, and he has an imaginary friend, Chucky. His parents are concerned Matthew's behaviour gets odder and odder. It's not your standard imaginary friend. Matthew asks difficult questions like how stuff works. Why do we have genders? Why do cows stop? Why don't they just escape from fields? I thought that the growing concern of his parents was well done in the book. He increasingly withdraws from their attentions. Later in the book, there's some unwelcome publicity relating to Chucky, and I thought that Wyndham did a good job of gradually increasing the tension and the worry and concern of his parents. It was a satisfying and quick read. It's not a particularly thick book, but it didn't grab me as much as some of the others. Next is Midwich Cuckoos, and again with the alien invasion. This time is an invasion by parasitic infestation. The book opens with a village, a very typical English village, effectively sealed off. The inhabitants are unconscious, lying where they fell. But by the next day, things are back to normal. But a few months later, it transpires that all the women have become pregnant, conjuring images of either some kind of dreadful violation or immaculate conception or alien magic or something. The resulting children are not lizards or anything. They're perfectly normal looking, although maybe a little bit odd. They have golden eyes and pale skin. They're unusually intelligent. Their growth is accelerated. And it turns out that they are able to control minds. They have a hive mind, one for the girls and one for the boys. And they declare themselves to be superior to the regular basic humans. They are literally otherworldly. And the uncanny valley nature of the kids induces fear in the local population, and there are mob attacks, but the children have effective defences using their mind control to good effect. And it transpires that there are other sites around the world which are dealt with in different ways. Now, how will the Midwich cuckoos be handled? I think the book raises interesting and profound moral questions, and it speaks to parental bonds, and the protective instincts that we normally have are subverted. Fundamentally, the question becomes, can we or should we destroy the children, or do we cede the planet to them? I did enjoy Midwich Cuckoos, but for me it's not top tier Wyndham. Next is Trouble with Lichen, and there are at least no aliens in this book. Instead, this book considers what would happen if there was an effective anti-aging treatment. We begin in a research institute where Diana Brackley and Francis Saxover discover an aging treatment which is derived from a rare form of lichen which only grows in one place in the world. They each separately test it, but have different practical worries about how that treatment, if it was unleashed on the world, might affect things. Diana ultimately leaves to open a beauty parlour, which seems like an overly cynical way to use the aging treatment, but she is taking the long view. She's a smart lady. She has an influential clientele. I think that Trouble with Lichen is an interesting study in how society would react if there really was an effective anti-aging treatment. Who would support it? Who would oppose it? Whose vested interests have the most to lose? And what lengths will they go to protect those vested interests? And if there's a limited supply, as there is in this book, who should get the treatment and who decides? I like the fact that there was a strong female protagonist, which was pretty unusual for the time and certainly pretty unusual for John Wyndham. She's a scientist, she's smart, she's feminine, and I did think that the questions that the book raised were quite thought-provoking, and I found myself considering them for some time afterwards. It's pretty good. Next is The Chrysalids, and this is an old favourite of mine. As I said at the beginning, I read it several times when I was younger. And I read it again recently, and it still works very well for me. It's a coming-of-age tale set in a far future. It's in a post-nuclear setting. There's radiation, there are blackened cities and plains of glass. And the old people, us, are now myth and legend. The book is based in a sort of bootstrapped community in what's now Labrador in Canada. And it's an agrarian society. It's strict and religious and God-fearing. They believe that man is made in his image, and any mutations that are found are blasphemies or abominations, and they're not to be tolerated, whether that's in animals, plants, or in humans. And the animals are killed and the crops are burnt, and the humans, if they're discovered, are banished to the fringes. This is a long-established coping mechanism for genetic deterioration that comes with radiation, but it's now become religious dogma. The main protagonist is David, a child at the beginning of the book who dreams of flying cars and cities. And he befriends Sophie, who it turns out very quickly has 6 toes and there's therefore an abomination. And David is friends with other children that he's never met that don't live near him, and how can this be? His sister Petra soon arrives, and she's an uncontrolled telepath. They're all mutations, and they have to stay hidden until they're unable to. And the book becomes a chase, a race for time. Like Midwich Cuckoos and Trouble with Lichen, this is a question of evolutionary superiority. Who should inherit the Earth? And that question, who are the winners and who decides and on what basis, is a recurring theme in Wyndham's books. I really love the world building, which I think is absent from some of the other Wyndham novels, which are all set in fairly typical English locations. I think that the characters are believable and likeable, and I find this a very readable book, and it's a quick read too, and not terribly demanding on the reader. All of which just leaves Day of the Triffids on the top of the heap. And this was also the first book published under the John Wyndham pen name in 1951. I have a big soft spot for this book, and I possibly come to this ranking with some bias. This book is a double catastrophe. There's a cosmic light show of uncertain origin that blinds everybody overnight. Bill wakes up in hospital having had some eye surgery, and things seem wrong. He removes his bandages and finds chaos. There are blind people everywhere stumbling around. Ultimately, he rescues Josella, another sighted person, and they form a partnership. In the chaos, things quickly go south, and there are bands of sighted survivors that have to scavenge and formulate plans. And then you have to add the Triffids to the mix, who seem to have evolved perfectly to succeed in this new world. Once again, there are questions of who should survive and who can be saved, how to rebuild and with what rules. and by which time the Triffid had become a real menace, acting en masse with apparent intelligence. Being an end-of-the-world tale, I really love this book, and the protagonists are super likeable as well, and there's a real sense of peril. It plays on our fears of blindness, and to my mind, it plays almost like a proto-zombie story. Again, I reread this recently, and I still love it. Triffids remains at the top of the Wyndham tree for me. What John Wyndham have you read, and which is your favourite? As always, thank you for watching, and until next time, goodbye for now.